okay, I don't know why I'm buying them, but I'm going to buy them because I really didn't have any place to put them either. So when this session was all over, I just had to grab those and show them to you because it's like Jesus had given me that as confirmation before the session even happened. So it was like he gave them to me ahead of time. And then I was able to just throw them away because I had no use for them. But it was one of those funny things that he does. It just was so sweet. So sweet.
Yeah, and I remember you showing me those prayer flags. And it's just like, this is the kind of stuff, sometimes when there's nothing massive to anchor a confirmation to, Jesus will give small confirmations in various ways. But sometimes the confirmations are massive, colossal, Jan. And they're so big, the whole world sits there and looks at them while they're happening. It's called world events. And the next thing that we're going to talk about today, because I know you want to bring this up, has to do with oil fields and shadow people. And folks, let me tell you something. When we were doing this work, which we're about to talk about, she's going to break it down for you. I'm going to tell you at the outset, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what is this woman talking about? Like, I don't always know where this stuff is going. You have to understand. Even at the end of the session of what she's about to explain to you, I was still kind of thinking like, why? What did we just do? Is there really going to be any fruit? But then when the confirmation came, which I'm not telling you what it is, you're going to have to wait till the end of the program to get it. My mind got blown. So let's talk about it, Jan. Let's talk about the oil fields and the shadow people. How did this start?
Okay. Well, this is one of those times when I had no idea what we were going to be working on in session. So when you invited Jesus to come in, Jesus showed up on a ski-doo. And he said, "To if by sea." And he invited me to get on this ski-doo. So I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. So my mind is already trying to figure out, which I have, to this date, I've not been able to stop my mind from trying to figure out where we're going. So we go, and I see us go out into the Gulf of Mexico, and it looks like we're circling that oil rig that had a spill a number of years ago. So I'm trying to figure out if it has something to do with the oil spill or whatever. And then a couple minutes later, I start remembering that when I was a little girl, and this is in my first podcast, that my dad murdered some boys. And when that happened, I think we packed up the next day and left Missouri, where we lived, and went to western Kansas and stayed 5 years out there. And my dad worked in the oil fields in western Kansas. So now there's this connection. I have the Gulf of Mexico, and now there's this oil fields in Kansas. So it's Jesus. Sometimes it seems like Jesus goes around in circles before he starts landing on things. And so anyway, while we were in Kansas, I have an aunt that's 3 years older than I am, and she and I were twinned together as children, and I believe it probably started happening in my initiation ceremony, which I was a year and a half old when that happened. And either she was made a protector over me, or I was made protector over her. I'm not sure which way it worked, or maybe we were just made protectors over each other. But basically, my understanding of that is that we were to report back on each other. So we were to be snitches, so that whatever activities we were involved in, that the powers that be would know what was going on. And so I had known this for a lot of years and had put a lot of prayers on it. She and I had put prayers on it. But there was this twinning process where our souls were entangled in some way. And you might be able to explain more than I understand about it. But I know we were connected by our souls.
Well, and I can explain a little bit about twinning. Now, anything that I explain, is based partially on what I've run into. But also, we as people forerunning in this area understand, they're always upgrading their technology. So what they did 2 decades or 3 decades ago, they're not still doing. They're doing it differently now. And what they used to do, and still in some cases will do, is they will twin people by putting them through trauma situations together. Twinning often involves one person watching someone get tortured, and then they take turns, and then that person that got tortured has to watch the other one get tortured. Then there will be games where one person has to rescue another person from being tortured. And if they're successful, maybe the torture stops. If they're unsuccessful, the torture will continue or be worse. And then role reversal. So there's a trauma bonding that takes place at a very deep level. Then they will go through torture together. They may be buried alive together for a time being, or some other kind of thing. They may be tortured simultaneously while watching each other get tortured. And in all of this stuff, there is a lot of soul parts that are getting swapped and knitted together in the process. And by the end of this, because of all of that soul swapping that takes place, the two people will be able to be manipulated in significant ways that otherwise would not have been possible. And so they call this process twinning. Of course, they can do this with virtual reality. They can do this with frequencies, sounds, tones, brain mapping involved. There's a lot more higher tech stuff that they are using now, digital twins, quantum computers to do twinning that they didn't used to. So with that said, go ahead.
Thank you. So when we moved to Kansas, my dad got this job in the oil fields, and he worked for a guy that owned this oil company, and we actually ended up living on his land. And so I never really knew if my dad knew anything about him or the town that we lived in or anything, or if that was just happenstance. But his name was Red. And I also knew that the coroner of the town where the boys were killed ended up coming to Kansas also. And so he was my main programmer and handler for my whole life, really. And so he showed up there when I was about 4 years old and started some elementary programming on me. I was also screened, I believe, in kindergarten or first grade in Kansas, and for parapsychology, for special giftings and so forth. So I think that may have been where I got into where I was identified by the like CIA or whoever Mingala was working with at that time. I actually believe that I encountered Mingala when I had my tonsils out when I was 5, and I was taken to a back room of the hospital by a man, and I believe now it was Mingala, and he put a halo, I would call it a halo, on my head, and it was charged with some sort of energy. And so I don't know 100% if that's where I first encountered him, but I suspect that I might have first encountered him there. And I know that this doctor from my hometown and Mingala had this relationship over a lot of years in contracts and so forth for using me on different projects and so forth. So as Jesus is just sort of walking me into this history of living in Kansas and my dad working in the oil fields, my mother had told me that he was drunk a lot when we lived there, and she would have to haul him out to the oil rigs and so forth. And so Jesus started giving me some downloads about that time, about these shadow people. And I remembered, the first thing that happened was I remembered when I was doing the work on my aunt and I and our twinning, I had these pictures that were drawn by my parts, and they were shadow people. They were figures of me, I thought, and they were back to back. They would stand back to back. They would sit back to back, and they were just all in just dark black crayon. And I never knew what that was all about, but I had a lot of the pictures. There were several of them. And so I knew that they were shadow people. So Jesus started downloading this information about the oil fields. Apparently have legends about shadow people. And it's something that people in the oil fields see on a fairly regular basis, I guess. And my dad, if he was drunk a lot, I could see where he might see them, whether they were there or not. But apparently he did see them. And so the story was, the legend by the oil field people was that these shadow people got separated at some point, and they were always looking for their twin. So if you saw a shadow person, it's because he was searching for his twin. And so that was the legend of them. Then they developed rituals that they did on top of these legends. So they used the legend as a foundation, and then they developed these rituals. And the rituals ended up being a way that they could develop blood brothers within the brotherhood of the oil field, if that makes sense. So the download about my dad was that he encountered this shadow people while he was drunk. And he actually made a contractual agreement with this oil company owner, Red, he basically sold my aunt and I into this bondage. And so ended up being a trading floor for my souls of my aunt and I. So the ritual apparently was done so that with one shadow person in my aunt and one shadow person in me, because we already had this twinning program foundation, it was a way for these shadow people to connect. And so that was the whole idea, was that there was a connecting going on because of our souls being already connected through the twinning. So you asked Jesus about what they are. What are the shadow people? And so Jesus started giving me not the information from my history, but more the information from who they actually are. And so he said that they were entities that were separated during the fall. They started out as one, but because of the fall, they were split. They were separated. And one part of the entities lived between the fourth and fifth dimensions, and the other part lives between the seventh and eighth dimensions. And they reach out to try to connect with each other through the fifth and seventh dimensions. So they're in essence, they're trapped in these dimensions. And so he told me that this happened, and they lived actually in the oil fields of the earth. So they came from that time when the oil fields were developed, and they actually travel through the oil in the earth was their sort of mode of travel. And so I thought that was kind of interesting that he brought that up.
And Jan, it was so interesting when you were saying that. And folks, I mean, some of the stuff that Jan was saying, right? Like between the fourth and fifth dimensions, between the seventh and eighth dimensions, like as she's describing these things to me, My job is to keep my mouth shut. I don't actually know what she's talking about. And I don't want to throw her off of her flow because she's struggling enough as it is to hear on this level anyway. Because, so we're both just like, okay, Jesus, help us, Holy Ghost. And as I'm listening, I'm thinking, because I've had myself a few encounters with shadow people, or what I thought were shadow people. And it was always in dreams. I remember even growing up, I had a dream with an encounter with a shadow person in the basement of my parents' house. And it was evil. It was opening up some kind of a portal. And there was another dream that I had where there was an encounter with a shadow person, and it kind of walked through me, and I felt real icky. Of course, this is going back a long time now, 15 plus years. And, I had a cousin on my dad's side of the family who had also had some encounters with shadow people. And we talked about it, and we were thinking, yeah, this might be attached to the bloodline on the Haitian side. And so I had done some renunciations surrounding shadow people in the past. And I even found out along the way that shadow people work their way into bondage of individuals through bloodline stuff. So if you go into my first book, Prayers That Shake Heaven and Earth, and you go into the non-human bloodline section, you'll actually find the shadow people bloodline, which has set some people free. But what Jen was describing was a whole new level of information. I had never made a connection to oil fields. I had never made a connection to, fifth and sixth dimensions and separation. And so we just tracked it. But anyway, Jen, go ahead and continue talking about what you were learning.
Yeah, so basically it came down to we needed to pray for this twinning that had happened between my aunt and I, so that these entities could be released from that. So you prayed over she and I saw the shadow people getting sucked back into their own realms. So they're back in the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. They're back in their own dimensions, but they're still separate. They're still separated. And so you asked Jesus what you should do, what we should do about that. And he said that you needed to form a bridge so that they could come together. And so you started praying, and when you pray, you always use the names of God. And as you were praying the names of God, I saw a bridge forming. It's like each name of God was a plank in the bridge, and it just got laid down one after the other, after the other, after the other, until this bridge stretched between those dimensions. And those shadow people came together on that bridge. And they were black. They were totally black when they were in their own dimensions. And when they met in the middle of that bridge, they turned to light. They turned to light. And Jesus had angels just come and escort them off to wherever they go. I don't know where they went. But it was the most amazing thing to watch, that